winter of 1943, the United States Navy quietly ended the careers of one out of every 3 submarine commanders in the Pacific. There was no press release, no court-martial, no public accounting of what had been done or why. These men were not incompetent on paper. They were not cowards by any measure the Navy had ever used. They had followed every rule the service had spent 20 years teaching them. And that was exactly why they had to go, because the man who had just taken command at Pearl Harbor had read their patrol reports, and what he saw told him that the United States was losing the war beneath the sea. Not because of the Japanese, because of the Americans themselves. To understand how it came to that, you have to go back 14 months to a Sunday morning in Hawaii, to the day the Pacific War began. December 7th, 1941 begins like any other Sunday in Pearl Harbor. Sailors on battleship row polish brass in the pale sunrise. Cooks fry eggs below decks. A band on the USS Nevada tunes up for morning colors. Then the sky fills with engines. 353 Japanese aircraft cross the Hawaiian coastline in 2 waves. Torpedo bombers skim the harbor at mast height. Dive bombers scream down from 6,000 feet. In under 2 hours, the Pacific Fleet of the United States Navy ceases to exist as a fighting force. 21 ships sink or burn beyond use. 8 battleships take direct hits, 4 are on the bottom. The Arizona breaks apart when a bomb reaches her forward magazine, and 1,100 men die in a single blast that shakes the harbor like an earthquake. When the smoke clears, 2,403 Americans are dead. The surface fleet that was supposed to dominate the Pacific War is a ruin of twisted steel and burning oil. But at a different pier, tucked away from the battleships and cruisers, another kind of warship rides quietly at her moorings, long, black, low in the water. Then another beside her, 51 fleet submarines, and a handful of aging S-class boats left over from the last war. Not one of them has been touched. The Japanese pilots fixate on the battleships they can see, never turn their guns on the vessels they cannot see fighting. It is the most consequential oversight of the entire war, because within hours of the last bomb falling, a single order goes out from Washington to every submarine base in the Pacific. Execute unrestricted submarine warfare against Japan. 19 words that erase 20 years of international law. For 2 decades, the civilized world has forbidden the sinking of merchant ships without warning. The United States has publicly condemned Germany for doing precisely this in the Atlantic. American diplomats have called it barbarism. Now, with the smoke still rising over Pearl Harbor, America becomes what she has condemned. The logic is brutal and simple. Japan's empire stretches across 20 million square miles of open ocean. Every barrel of oil from the Dutch East Indies, every ton of rice from Indochina, every ingot of tin, every drum of rubber, every replacement soldier bound for a jungle garrison, all of it must travel by ship. Cut those ships out of the water, and the empire starves in its own harbors. The submarines are the only force that can reach those lines. The man who signs that order understands submarines better than almost any officer in the United States Navy. Chester William Nimitz is 56 years old, silver-haired, calm in a way that his subordinates find almost unnerving. He does not raise his voice. He does not slam his fist on tables. He listens. In the First World War, he served as chief of staff to the Atlantic Submarine Force. He has spent his career studying what these strange, dangerous machines can do. He knows their possibilities. And on the last day of December 1941, when he takes command of what remains of the Pacific Fleet, he already knows what he is going to ask of them. He is going to ask them to do the impossible. The men who volunteer for submarine duty do not do it for glory. There is no glory beneath the waves. There are no headlines waiting when they come home. There are no correspondents crowded on the pier to record their stories. There is only the boat. Every patrol means 60 to 75 days sealed inside a steel tube 300 feet long. The air grows thick with diesel fumes and the sour reek of unwashed bodies. Fresh water is rationed by the cupful. R. Fresh food runs out inside a fortnight, replaced by powdered eggs, powdered milk, and flour so infested with weevils that the cooks stop trying to pick them out. Men learn to eat their bread by the light of the ovens, so they cannot see what moves inside it. But hunger and stench are not the enemy. The enemy is silence. When a Japanese destroyer finds the boat, the depth charges begin. The men lie in their bunks and count the seconds between explosions. 1, 2, 3. Each blast closer than the last. The pressure hull groans like a wounded animal. Light bulbs shatter. Cork insulation rains from the overhead. Somewhere in the darkness, a valve springs a leak and cold seawater hisses into the compartment. They wait to see if the next one will be the one that cracks the hull. If it is, the boat will not sink slowly. R. It will implode. At 300 feet, the ocean will crush 80 tons of steel into a coffin the size of a rowboat in less than a heartbeat. The men inside will not have time to know they are dying. By the end of the war, 52 American submarines will vanish beneath the Pacific. 3,506 men will not come home. It will be the highest loss rate any American service will suffer in the war. R. These are the men Chester Nimitz is sending into the dark. Across the Pacific, in the tall stone buildings of the Navy Ministry in Tokyo, the Japanese Imperial Navy studies the same weapon and reaches the opposite conclusion. They are not afraid of American submarines. They should be, but they are not. On the entire naval general staff, only one officer is assigned to oversee anti-submarine warfare as a primary duty. Destroyer captains train for glorious fleet engagements against enemy battleships, consider convoy escort work beneath their dignity. To shepherd freighters through empty seas is a duty for lesser officers, lesser ships, lesser careers. The Imperial Navy builds no meaningful convoy system in the first 2 years of the war. It develops no coordinated anti-submarine doctrine. Its sonar operators are poorly trained. Its depth charge patterns are predictable. Its destroyer captains, when they do escort merchant traffic, do so with visible reluctance. And the Japanese arrogance appears arrogance entirely justified, because the American submarines are failing. In all of 1942, American submarines sink 134 Japanese merchant ships. The total tonnage barely reaches 580,000 tons. R. Japan is building new merchant ships faster than the Americans can put them on the bottom. The net loss to the Japanese merchant fleet after 12 months of the most aggressive submarine campaign in history is essentially zero. Something is wrong. Something is deeply catastrophically wrong. But the problem is not the boats. The boats are the finest submarines any Navy has ever put to sea. Fast, deep diving, heavily armed, with a cruising range that can take them from Pearl Harbor to the coast of Japan and back without refueling. The problem is the men. For 20 years, the United States Navy has trained its submarine captains for a war that does not exist. Peacetime doctrine emphasizes caution above all else. Approach the target submerged. Fire from maximum range. Avoid detection at every cost. Never, under any circumstances, risk the boat. It is textbook procedure. It is safe. It is exactly what the training schools have drilled into every officer who has qualified for command in the past 2 decades. And it is losing the war. Patrol after patrol returns to Pearl Harbor with torpedoes still resting in their tubes. Captains file reports describing convoys they sighted from a distance and chose not to engage. Contacts they investigated and decided were too dangerous. Escorts that seemed too alert. Weather that seemed too clear. The reports read like peacetime exercises, cautious and correct and utterly useless. There is a reason for this that cuts to the heart of what a submarine actually is. Alone at sea for 2 months at a stretch, a submarine captain answers to no one. There is no admiral watching over his shoulder. R. There is no radio call demanding to know why he has not attacked. The vast Pacific swallows him whole, and for weeks at a time he is the sole judge of his own courage. A cautious captain can spend an entire patrol avoiding the enemy. He can log every distant sighting, note every decision to dive, and return to port with his boat clean and his crew rested. No one will know. No one can know. Not until the boat comes home and the numbers on the scoreboard tell the story that the words in the report have hidden. Ship after ship, patrol after patrol, zero tonnage, zero contacts pressed home, zero risk. And back at Pearl Harbor, in the offices overlooking the ruined Battleship Row, Chester Nimitz reads the reports and understands, with a clarity that must have been terrible, that the only offensive weapon he possesses is being wasted by the men he trusted to wield it. The Japanese do not know how close they are to winning the war under the sea. They do not know that the submarines they dismiss as harmless will one day sink more than half of everything their empire ever floated. They do not know that their contempt for the American submariner is a mistake for which their nation will pay a price beyond calculation. But they do not know these things yet. Neither does Nimitz, neither does any man in the United States Navy. All that is certain in the winter of 1940-42 is that the war is being lost in the depths, that the finest submarines ever built are being commanded by the wrong men, and that somewhere in the vast machinery of the American war effort, someone is going to have to find the courage to say the unsayable, that the problem is not the equipment, that the problem is not the enemy. That the problem is the officer corps of the United States submarine force itself, and the man who will finally say it is not yet at Pearl Harbor. He is halfway across the world, not knowing that in a few short weeks, the death of another man will place him in command of the most important submarine force in the history of naval warfare. His name is Charles Lockwood, and he is about to change everything. January 21st, 1943, a Navy transport plane lifts off from an airfield on the West Coast bound eastward. Aboard is Rear Admiral Robert Henry, English Commander Submarines Pacific Fleet. He has come home from Pearl Harbor to argue in Washington for more boats, more torpedoes, more of everything the submarine force is not getting fast enough. He never arrives. The plane goes down in bad weather in the mountains of Northern California. English dies with the crew. There is no wreckage worth photographing. There is no last message. There is only a telegram that reaches Pearl Harbor a few days later, and a sudden, silent vacancy at the top of the most critical command in the Pacific. Death has just made a decision that will alter the course of the war. The man who takes his place is 52 years old. Slim, weathered, with the deep-set eyes of a man who has spent too many years staring at maps. His name is Charles Andrews Lockwood, and he has been running the submarines out of Fremantle in Western Australia. He is respected, he is competent, he is, by every measure the Navy has ever used, a solid officer. But there is something about him that the peacetime Navy has never quite trusted. Lockwood believes the submarine captains under his command. He believes them when they say the torpedoes do not work. He believes them when they say the doctrine is wrong. He believes them when they say that men are dying, because Washington will not listen. And when he arrives at Pearl Harbor in February of 1943 to take command of the Pacific Submarine Force, he brings that belief with him. He walks into his new office. He sits down at the desk that Robert English will never occupy again, and he begins to read. The patrol reports come to him in stacks, boat by boat, captain by captain, month by month. He reads them the way a doctor reads a stack of x-rays looking for what is wrong. The story he finds is devastating. 52 war patrols, 0 sinkings, not a single ship, not a single kill. Not a single moment where the captain closed the range, took the shot, and drew blood. Some of these men have been to sea 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, and returned each time with the same clean logbook and the same careful excuses. Lockwood puts down the reports. He does not shout. He does not slam anything. He walks down the hall to the office of the man he has chosen as his training officer. Captain John Wilcox Brown, known to every officer in the submarine force as Babe. He is a big man, broad-shouldered, still carrying the frame of the Navy football star he was as a young cadet. Now he is a gray-haired veteran with a reputation for seeing the truth about men that other officers miss. Lockwood tells him what he wants. He wants to go through every commanding officer in the Pacific Submarine Force, every single one. are, and he wants to know which of them is going to fight and which of them is not. Babe Brown gets to work. What follows is the quietest revolution in the history of the United States Navy. There is no public purge. There are no press conferences. No admiral is called to account in front of a congressional committee. But over the next 18 months, 1/3 of every commanding officer in the Pacific Submarine Force is removed from command. Some are transferred to training billets ashore. Some are sent to desk jobs at the Bureau of Personnel. Some are simply not given another boat when their current command rotates. The paperwork is polite. The reasons stated are administrative. The careers are ended without a single accusation ever appearing in writing. But the officer corps understands what is happening. Word that comes down through every wardroom in the Pacific is short and clear. Aggression is the new standard. If you have been to sea and come home with your torpedoes still in the tubes, your career in the silent service is over. But even as Lockwood cleans house among the men, he discovers something worse than cowardice, something that makes the failures of 1942 look like a betrayal by the very Navy that sent these men to sea. The problem is not just the captains. The problem is the torpedoes. The Mark 14 is the standard weapon of every fleet submarine in the Pacific. It is nearly 21 feet long, weighs over 3,000 pounds, and carries a warhead of more than 600 pounds of high explosive. It is supposed to be the deadliest anti-ship weapon in the American arsenal. It has 3 catastrophic defects. And no one at the Bureau of Ordnance is willing to admit any of them. The first defect is depth. The Mark 14 runs on average 11 feet deeper than the setting the captain dials into the fire control panel. A torpedo set to run at 10 feet will actually run at 21. It passes harmlessly beneath the keel of the target ship, its warhead untouched by anything but empty ocean. The second defect is the magnetic exploder. The Mark 14 is designed to detonate under the hull of a ship triggered by the disturbance in the Earth's magnetic field caused by the enemy's steel plates. It is an elegant design, and it does not work. Sometimes the exploder triggers 100 feet from the target. Sometimes it triggers as the torpedo leaves the tube. Sometimes it does not trigger at all. The third defect is the contact exploder. This is the backup. When the magnetic system fails, the torpedo is supposed to detonate on physical impact with the target's hull. But the firing pin is too weak. When the torpedo strikes at a perfect 90-degree angle, the very angle that submarine captains have been drilled for years to achieve, the pin is crushed instead of struck. The warhead does nothing. The torpedo simply bounces off the target ship and sinks into the darkness, 600 pounds of high explosive gone to waste. American captains are performing perfect approaches. They are firing textbook spreads at point-blank range. They are watching their torpedoes streak toward the target, holding their breath, waiting for the explosion, and nothing happens. Sometimes they see the torpedo pass beneath the ship and continue on into the empty sea. Sometimes they hear the sickening thud of a dud slamming into steel. Sometimes they see a puff of harmless smoke as a warhead detonates 100 feet from the target and dies without hurting anything. Behind them in the control room, sailors weep with frustration. Ahead of them on the surface, Japanese destroyers turn and come hunting. And in Washington, the Bureau of Ordnance sends back memoranda blaming the captains. The torpedoes work fine in tests, the Bureau says. The problem must be poor maintenance. The problem must be improper handling. The problem must be inaccurate marksmanship. The problem must be the men. Charles Lockwood knows the men. He has read their reports. He has looked into their faces. He has heard them describe attacks that should have sunk half the Japanese merchant marine and produced nothing but empty ocean. At a wartime conference in Washington, Lockwood stands before the assembled admirals of the Bureau of Ordnance. He is a 52-year-old flag officer, gentleman by upbringing, disciplined by decades of service. And what he says that day is remembered in submarine wardrooms for a generation. If the Bureau of Ordnance cannot provide us with torpedoes that will hit and explode, then for God's sake, get the Bureau of Ships to design a boat hook so we can rip the plates off the target's sides. The room goes silent. But even after that outburst, even after the evidence piles up beyond any possible denial, it takes until September of 1943, nearly 2 full years into the war, before every defect in the Mark 14 is finally, formally, officially corrected. 2 years. 2 years of American sailors going into combat with weapons that did not work. 2 years of watching torpedoes fail while Japanese destroyers closed in for the kill. 2 years of dead men whose only mistake was trusting that the Navy which sent them to sea had given them a weapon that would fight for them. The bureaucracy in Washington will never account for what it cost, but Lockwood does not wait for Washington. While the fight over the torpedoes drags on, he is already looking for something else, someone else. He is looking for the men who will fight this war the way it needs to be fought, whether the weapons work or not. He is looking for outcasts. His first find is a man whose Navy career has already been declared finished. Lieutenant Commander Dudley Walker Morton is 35 years old. Born in Kentucky, big-shouldered, dark-haired, with a slow southern drawl and a laugh that fills whatever room he happens to be standing in. His nickname in the submarine service is Mush. Nobody quite remembers how he got it, but it fits him the way his uniform fits him, comfortable and permanent. Morton has just been removed from command of the submarine USS Dolphin. His division commander has lost confidence in his ability to solve the boat's mechanical problems. The Dolphin is old, tired, breaking down on every patrol. Morton has been unable to fix her. On paper, this is a failure of leadership. On paper, this is the end of his career. But Babe Brown reads the paper differently. Brown looks at the same evaluations of the Navy system as failure. And he sees something else. He sees a man who does not shrink from risk, who does not defer to caution, who does not, when the moment comes, hesitate. The Navy has been trying to make Dudley Morton into a careful officer for years. It has failed. Because Dudley Morton is not a careful officer. He is a fighter. And in the winter of 1943, a fighter is exactly what Charles Lockwood needs. Brown assigns Morton as prospective commanding officer aboard a submarine called the USS Wohoo. The Wohoo is also a failure. Her previous captain, Lieutenant Commander Marvin Granville Kennedy, called Pinky by the men who serve under him, has taken her out on 2 war patrols and returned with almost nothing. The boat is well built. The crew is competent. But something about Kennedy's command is wrong in the same way that so many commands in the winter of 1940 and 1943. The executive officer of the Wahoo is a lean, intense lieutenant named Richard Hetherington O'Kane, 32 years old, sharp-faced, impatient. He has already begun to think about requesting a transfer because he cannot bear another patrol like the last one. Wahoo was not making much of a record. O'Kane will write years later, and we knew it. Kennedy is quietly relieved. Morton takes command. Everything is about to change. On the day Wahoo prepares to sail on her 3rd war patrol, Morton gathers the entire crew on the afterdeck. It is a bright Pacific afternoon. The men stand in ranks, their dungarees pressed, their faces still certain about the big Kentuckian who now commands them. He does not give them a speech. He gives them a warning. According to those who were there, his message was spendable. Their job was to sink enemy shipping. Every smoke trace on the horizon, every contact on watch would be investigated. If it turned out to be the enemy, they would hunt it down, and they would kill it. He looked at them for a long moment. Anyone who wanted to stay behind, he told them, had 30 minutes to notify the yeoman. No negative word would be said about anyone who remained. Then he turned and walked back into the boat. 30 minutes passed. Not a single man requested a transfer. What Morton does on that patrol and on the ones that follow breaks every rule the peacetime Navy has ever written about how a submarine is supposed to fight. He places O'Kane on the periscope during submerged attacks. Standard doctrine requires the captain to man the scope himself, calling out the ranges and bearings that will feed the firing solution. Morton throws that doctrine out. He puts O'Kane on the scope and runs the plot himself, standing over the chart table, calculating vectors and lead angles while his executive officer describes what he sees through the eyepiece. R. It is a system that only works if the captain trusts his subordinate absolutely. Morton does, and that trust frees him to think tactically in a way no submarine captain before him has been able to think. He is not looking at the target, he is looking at the battle space. On Wahoo's third patrol, Morton takes the boat into Wewak Harbor. Wewak is a Japanese supply base on the north coast of New Guinea. It is not on any American chart. R. The Navy has no proper survey of its approaches. There are shoals, reefs, tides no one has recorded. Morton needs a map. A motor machinist's mate rummages through a sea locker and comes up with a cheap tape high school atlas he bought in a bookstore in Australia. He hands it to the captain. Morton takes it. He navigates one of the most valuable submarines in the United States Navy into an enemy harbor, using a child's geography textbook. Inside Wewak, he finds a Japanese destroyer. The destroyer spots the Wahoo's periscope and turns to attack. Bow on, closing fast, coming down the Wahoo's throat. Every training manual in the American Submarine Service says to dive deep and run. Morton does not dive. He waits. He tracks. He fires his torpedoes directly into the oncoming bow of the destroyer, a shot the manuals call impossible. The destroyer explodes. R. Over the following weeks, Morton chases convoys the way a wolf chases sheep. He attacks on the surface at night, using darkness and speed to outmaneuver escorts that cannot see him coming. He runs down ships that think they have escaped, following them for hours, taking his time, making sure of every shot. On Wahoo's fourth patrol in the Yellow Sea, he claims 9 ships sunk in a single sweep. R. Post-war accounting would revise the number downward, but whatever the true total, Morton had produced the most productive patrol by any American submarine captain to that point in the war. The silent service has never seen anything like Dudley Morton. But Morton is not what Lockwood is looking for. Not really. Morton is the first. The proof that it can be done. What Lockwood needs is what Morton produces next. He needs protégés. R. Dick O'Kane watches everything Morton does. He learns the tactics. He absorbs the philosophy. And when the Navy gives him his own command, the brand new fleet submarine USS Tang, he takes everything Morton has taught him and pushes it further. O'Kane attacks on the surface in daylight with extra lookouts to spot aircraft before they can find him. He closes to point-blank range before firing, sometimes to less than 1,000 yards, so close that a miss is almost impossible. Other captains call his tactics suicidal. The tonnage he sinks will silence them. Slade Cutter, a former Navy football star like Babe Brown himself, is another officer whose first command ended in failure and who might have been quietly retired in any other war. Brown gives him another boat. R. Cutter becomes one of the top 3 submarine captains of the entire war. Lawson Ramage, called Red for the color of his hair, takes his boat into the middle of a Japanese convoy at night on the surface with the deck gun blazing and fights the kind of running battle that will eventually earn him the Medal of Honor. And a young lieutenant commander named Eugene Bennett Fluckey, 31 years old, quiet, methodical, takes command of the USS Barb and begins to plan operations so audacious that the Navy has no doctrine for what he intends to do. These are the outcasts. The men the peacetime Navy overlooked, doubted, or wrote off. The men Lockwood and Brown pulled from the discard pile and put in command of the finest submarines in the Pacific. R, and they are about to be handed a second weapon, one the Japanese do not know about, that will magnify their aggression into annihilation at Pearl Harbor. A team of American cryptanalysts has broken the Japanese Merchant Marine Code. Every convoy sailing between Singapore and Yokohama transmits its route, its schedule, its cargo, its escorts. Every transmission is intercepted. Every transmission is read. R, the information flows to Lockwood. Lockwood sends it out to the boats on patrol. American submarines do not have to search for the enemy anymore. They know where the enemy will be, when he will arrive, and what he will be carrying. The Japanese do not know their code has been broken. They will not know until the war is over. R, and they respond to the mounting slaughter of their merchant fleet, true to the pattern they had established from the first day. They do nothing. There is no crash program to build convoy escorts. There is no serious effort to train sonar operators. There is no strategic reevaluation of the submarine threat. To admit the threat is real would be to admit that the initial dismissal was wrong. And in the culture of the Imperial Japanese Navy, admitting that you were wrong is a form of dishonor that senior officers will die before accepting. So they die by the tens of thousands in freighters and tankers and troop transports that vanish beneath the Pacific without warning. The numbers tell the story. In 1942, American submarines sank 104. In 1943, 335. R. In 1944, 603 merchant ships totaling more than 2,700,000 tons, more than the first 25 months of the war combined. And it is not only merchant shipping. In 1944, American submarines sink the fleet carrier Shokaku and the brand new supercarrier Taiho during the Battle of the Philippine Sea. They sink or disable 3 heavy cruisers at the opening of the Battle of Leyte Gulf. R, they sink the battleship Congo, destroyed by a submarine in the entire war. And they sink the Shinano. The largest aircraft carrier ever built up at that point in history, sent to the bottom on her maiden voyage by 4 torpedo hits from the submarine Archerfish. She has been at sea for less than 17 hours. The men Lockwood chose over the Navy's favorites are no longer proving anything. They are winning anything. They are winning the war. But they are paying for it in blood, in boats, in men who will never see home again. And the price is about to come due. October 11th, 1943, the Le Perouse Strait runs between the northern tip of Japan and the southern shore of the Soviet island of Sakhalin. It is a cold, gray channel of water, 40 miles wide at its narrowest point, patrolled by Japanese aircraft and swept by radar stations on both flanks. In peacetime, it is a shipping lane. In wartime, it is a hunting ground. Somewhere in that strait, on the surface, running for open water, is the USS Wahoo. Dudley Morton is 36 years old. He has just completed the most destructive stretch of submarine patrols in the history of the United States Navy up to that point. On his previous cruise, he has sunk more Japanese shipping than most captains will sink in a career. His crew is exhausted. His fuel is low. He is coming home. He never makes it. Japanese aircraft catch the Wahoo on the surface in daylight. There is no time to dive. There is no room to run. The bombs come down out of a low autumn sky, and the boat that opened the war for a generation of American submariners breaks apart and slips beneath the water. 79 men die. Not one body is recovered. When the news reaches Pearl Harbor, Charles Lockwood shuts himself in his office. He does not come out for a long time. And when he finally writes about it, the words come out slowly, one at a time, as if each one costs him something. It just didn't seem possible, he writes, that Morton and his fighting crew could be lost. I'd never have believed the Japs could be smart enough to get him. The Wahoo takes with her something more than 79 sailors. She takes the founder of a school, the man who taught Dick O'Kane. R, the man who inspired Slade Cutter and Red Ramage and Gene Fluckey and half the killers who now roam the Pacific with the Japanese merchant marine in their sights. Morton is not the first American submarine captain to die. He will not be the last. But when he goes down, an entire era of the silent service goes down with him. His students are still at sea. They are still fighting. R, and one of them is about to face a horror that not even Morton could have imagined. October 24th, 1944, the Formosa Strait, the narrow band of water between the coast of China and the island the Japanese have held since 1895. The USS Tang, under the command of Richard Hetherington O'Kane, is in the middle of her 5th war patrol. She has already become a legend. By the war's end, Tang's official record, as confirmed by post-war Japanese accounting, will stand at 24 ships sunk, nearly 94,000 tons. It is the highest confirmed tonnage tonnage total achieved by any American submarine commander in the entire war. O'Kane has taken everything Morton taught him and refined it into something even more lethal. He attacks in daylight. He closes to point-blank range. R. He fights the way his teacher taught him to fight. On this night, in the Formosa Strait, he has one torpedo left in the tube. He has already been shooting all night. He has attacked a convoy on the surface, weaving between the escorts, firing spread after spread, watching the freighters burn. His crew is running on adrenaline and coffee. There is one Japanese transport still afloat, damaged, drifting. O'Kane lines up the shot. He fires the last torpedo. The Mark 14 leaves the tube, turns hard right, and comes back at the boat that fired it. It is called a circular run. It is one of the deepest fears of every submarine crew that has ever taken a Mark 14 to sea. The torpedo malfunctions. The gyroscope fails. Instead of running straight to the target, the weapon curves in a wide arc and returns to the point of firing, its warhead armed, its speed 46 knots, its accuracy against the very submarine that launched it now perfect. O'Kane sees it in the darkness. There is nothing he can do. The torpedo strikes the tang aft near the maneuvering room. The warhead detonates. 600 pounds of high explosive, the same warhead the Bureau of Ordnance spent insisting worked perfectly, tears the stern off the boat and sends her to the bottom in less than a minute. 87 men are aboard. 78 of them die. O'Kane is on the bridge when the torpedo hits. The blast throws him into the water. R. He surfaces in the middle of the Formosa Strait, in the dark, with the boat gone and men screaming in the oil-slick water around him. He is 33 years old. His war is over. 8 men make it out of the sinking submarine and reach the surface. 9 men in total, including O'Kane, are pulled from the water by a Japanese escort. Some are beaten, all are starved. They spend the rest of the war in a Japanese prisoner of war camp on the home islands, worked half to death, watching men die around them of dysentery and beatings. Richard O'Kane comes home in 1945 weighing 88 pounds. He can barely stand. President Truman will place the Medal of Honor around his neck. He will live another 49 years. Quiet, private, haunted. R. And the weapon that killed his boat, the defective Mark 14 torpedo that Charles Lockwood had fought against for 2 full years, will remain in United States Navy service for another decade. The circle closes. The war that began with defective torpedoes and cautious captains has, in its final year, killed the greatest submarine captain the United States has ever produced, the very weapon it should have replaced in 1942. There is no justice in it. There is only the war. But the war is not over. And while O'Kane sits in a prison camp on the Japanese home islands, another captain is about to write the final chapter of what the Outcasts have become. His name is Eugene Bennett Fluckey. He is 31 years old, methodical where Morton was flamboyant, quiet where O'Kane was intense. He wears his hair short and his uniform pressed. He looks like an accountant. R. He fights like a demon. The submarine USS Barb has already earned a nickname across the Pacific, the Galloping Ghost. Under Fluckey, she does not patrol, she raids. January 23rd, 1945. The coast of China, Fluckey learns that a large Japanese convoy is anchored in Namquan Harbor, a shallow anchorage crowded with rocks and reefs, protected by mudflats that no submarine has ever tried to penetrate. R. His charts show water so thin that the Barb will scrape her keel on the bottom at low tide. Fluckey takes the Barb in anyway. He runs on the surface at night through waters no American submarine has ever seen, weaving between anchored ships and grounded freighters. He gets within 3,000 yards of the main anchorage. He fires every torpedo he has, one salvo after another, at ships that have no idea he is there. Multiple vessels are hit. R. A tanker burns to the waterline. When the Japanese finally realize what has happened, Fluckey is already running for open water, blowing his tanks, driving the Barb at flank speed through waters shallow enough that her propellers throw mud into the wake behind her. He escapes. For that raid, and for what he will do in the months that follow, Eugene Fluckey will receive the Medal of Honor. But Namquan is not the end. R. In the summer of 1945, Flucky does something no submarine captain in history has ever done before. He mounts a bank of 5-inch spin-stabilized rockets on the deck of the Barb. Projectiles adapted from ground and air use, rigged for launch from a submarine by a man who refuses to accept what a submarine is supposed to be able to do. He runs the Barb up to the coast of Japan itself, and he fires the rockets into the town of Shari on the island of Hokkaido. It is the first time in history a submarine has launched a missile attack against a land target. Then he does something even more remarkable. He sends a landing party ashore on Japanese-held territory. 8 men from the Barb's crew paddle to the beach of Karafudo, the southern half of Sakhalin Island, then a Japanese colony. They carry demolition charges. They find a Japanese railway line running along the coast. They plant their charges beneath the tracks, and when the train comes down the line, the charges detonate. The locomotive derails. The cars burn. They are the only American ground combat force to land on Japanese sovereign territory and conduct offensive operations during the entire war. They row back to the Barb. Flucky submerges, and the galloping Ghost slips away into the darkness of the North Pacific, having done what no one thought a submarine could do. This is what the Outcasts have become. The men Charles Lockwood pulled from the discard pile of the peacetime Navy have not just won the war under the sea. They have redefined what a submarine is, what it can do, what a man with a fast boat and a fanatical crew can accomplish when he is not told what is impossible. But while Flucky is running rockets at Hokkaido and O'Kane is starving in a prison camp and Morton lies in the mud of the La Perouse Strait, the true measure of what the Silent Service has accomplished is being felt across the Japanese Empire. It is being felt in the empty fuel tanks of the Imperial Japanese Navy. In 1944, Japan had expected to import 28.5 million barrels of oil from her conquered territories in Southeast Asia. She receives less than 5 million. Her warships stay in harbor because they cannot fuel their boilers. Her pilots cannot train because there is no aviation gasoline. Her factories run at fractions of capacity. Her people in the cities of the home islands begin to starve. Bulk commodity imports to Japan, all of them, everything that moves across the ocean by ship, fall from 19.4 million tons in 1942 to 16.4 million tons in 1943 to less than 10 million tons in 1944. By the beginning of 1945, foreign trade has essentially ceased. The merchant marine that carried the lifeblood of the empire has lost over 75% of its total tonnage. Ships are being sunk faster than Japan can build them, faster than she can even track them. Whole convoys leave Singapore and disappear before they reach the home islands, their cargoes on the bottom of the South China Sea, their crews drowned in the dark. After the war is over, when the surviving Japanese cabinet members to explain how their empire was defeated, they will give an answer that stuns even the officers of the American occupation. The greatest single cause of defeat, they will say, was the loss of shipping. Not the atomic bombs, not the firebombing of Tokyo, not the loss of the Philippines or the fall of Okinawa, the loss of the ships. The strangulation of the merchant marine, the slow suffocation of an island and empire that could not feed itself once the ships stopped coming home. That was the Silent Service. That was the Outcasts. After the war, when American commanders were asked to rank the weapons that had won the Pacific, one senior admiral put submarines first, radar second, airplanes third, bulldozers fourth. The final tally is almost impossible to believe. United States submarines operating with less than 2% of the total personnel of the United States Navy sank 1,314 enemy vessels in the Pacific. 54.6% of every Japanese ship lost in the entire war. 1 battleship, 8 aircraft carriers, 11 cruisers, 42 destroyers, 23 enemy submarines, and more than 5 million tons of merchant shipping. Less than 2% of the Navy sank more than half of everything Japan ever floated. Chester Nimitz, in the words he offered after the war, spoke a sentence about what those men accomplished that most Americans have never heard. During the dark early months of World War II, he said, it was only the tiny American submarine force that held off the Japanese Empire and enabled our fleet to replace their losses and repair their wounds. But they paid for it. 52 American submarines rest on the floor of the Pacific Ocean tonight, some of them known. Most of them lost with all hands in waters so deep that no diver will ever find them. 3,506 American submariners are still down there. Their bones lie in the wrecked hulls of the boats they died in. They will never come home. 22% of every man who went to sea in a United States submarine did not return. Higher than the infantry. Higher than the Marines who took Iwo Jima. Higher than the bomber crews over Germany. 1 in every 5, dead in the dark. Dead in the cold. Dead in a steel tube crushed by the weight of the sea that killed them. And the country they died for barely knew they existed. The silent service earned its name honestly. During the war, submarine operations were classified. Sailors were sworn to secrecy about what their boats had done and where they had gone. Many of them never spoke of it afterwards, not to their children, not to anyone. They came home and they took off the uniforms and they went to work in factories and offices and farms, and they carried what they had seen and done inside them for the rest of their lives. Dudley Morton has no grave. His name is carved into a memorial wall along with the names of every other submariner who died and was never recovered. Most Americans do not know that such a wall exists. Richard O'Kane came home from the prison camp and lived quietly in California until his death in 1994. He did not seek out the public. He gave few interviews. When asked to describe what happened to the Tang, he answered in short sentences and changed the subject as soon as he could. Eugene Fluckey came home and served in the Navy for another 20 years. He wrote a book about the Barb late in his life, dedicated to the men who did not come back. It is one of the few first-person accounts of the war under the sea that most Americans will ever read. Charles Lockwood retired as a vice admiral in 1947. He spent the rest of his life writing books and articles trying to make his country remember what his submariners had done. He is buried in California. His grave is quiet. John Brown, who found Morton and Cutter and half the killers of the silent service, died in 1962. His obituaries called him a football star. Most did not mention the war at all. The outcasts, the misfits. The men who did not fit the peacetime Navy's image of what a submarine officer was supposed to be. Charles Lockwood and Chester Nimitz found them. They gave them command. They sent them into the dark. And those men, more than any other single force in the United States military, brought the Japanese Empire to its knees. They did it in silence. They did it in secrecy. They did it at a cost that no one who was not there can fully understand. 52 submarines rest on the floor of the Pacific tonight. 3,506 names are carved into a memorial that most of you will never see. The numbers speak for themselves. Whether anyone is listening is another question entirely. But you have listened tonight, right now. You have heard their story. And that is how they come home.